The Chinese Grand Prix has just ended. And only a few hours later, the FIA is already looking deeper into the Red Bull RB22. Not after a crash. Not after a penalty. But after something far more worrying. A sudden loss of power that forced Max Verstappen to retire from the race, just 10 laps from the finish. The steering wheel briefly went dark. The car lost acceleration. And the reigning world champion had no choice but to bring the car back to the pits and abandon the race. But that's only the surface of the story. Because inside the paddock, engineers immediately began talking about a possible electrical failure inside the brand new Red Bull Ford hybrid system. And when a Formula One hybrid system fails, the FIA pays attention. Now the governing body wants the data. Energy deployment. Battery behavior. Hybrid control systems. Everything. And the timing could not be worse for Red Bull. Because this happened in only the second race of the season. At a moment when the RB22 was already struggling for pace. Verstappen started only 8th. The car looked unstable all weekend. And even the rookie, Isaac Hadjar, finished the race in 8th place while Verstappen retired. So the real question is no longer just why Verstappen had a DNF in China. The real question is this. Did the Chinese Grand Prix just expose a simple mechanical failure? Or the first major problem of Red Bull's new engine era? Subscribe now. Because what the FIA might find inside the RB22 could change the entire championship. The moment Verstappen's car stopped delivering full power in Shanghai, something unusual happened behind the scenes. The Red Bull pit wall did not react with panic. They reacted with silence. Engineers immediately began studying the telemetry coming from the RB22. Hundreds of sensors. Thousands of lines of data. Battery temperatures. Energy deployment curves. Voltage stability. Hybrid recovery levels. Because in modern Formula One, a power loss like this almost never comes from a simple mechanical failure. Most of the time, the problem hides inside the hybrid system. And that system is one of the most heavily regulated parts of the entire car. Which is why the FIA pays very close attention whenever something unusual appears in the data. The first signs of trouble appeared during the final phase of the race. Verstappen was no longer fighting for the podium. But after recovering from a difficult start, he had managed to climb back into 6th position. It was not the result Red Bull wanted, but it was valuable championship points. Then suddenly, exiting one of Shanghai's long corners, the car hesitated. Acceleration dropped. The electric boost felt inconsistent. And within seconds, Verstappen reported the problem over the radio. Power loss. Moments later, the steering wheel display briefly went dark, a signal that an electrical interruption had occurred somewhere in the system. From that point onward, the RB22 was no longer operating normally. Sometimes the electric motor deployed power. Other times it did not. The difference might sound small. But the hybrid system in modern Formula One can provide more than 100 extra horsepower. Lose that suddenly, and the car becomes dramatically slower. Cars behind Verstappen began closing rapidly on the long Shanghai Straight. The Red Bull that once dominated these situations suddenly looked vulnerable. Inside the garage, engineers realized the problem was escalating. Electrical failures inside hybrid systems rarely stabilize. They usually worsen with every lap. Battery loads increase. Temperatures rise. And protection systems begin shutting down parts of the power unit to prevent catastrophic damage. That is exactly what Red Bull feared. With only a few laps remaining, the team made the decision. Bring the car back. Retire the race. Verstappen managed to return to the pits under reduced power before the system failed completely, ending his Chinese Grand Prix early. At that moment, the incident looked like a normal reliability issue. But what happened after the race changed the story. Because once the FIA received the initial data logs from the race, attention quickly shifted toward the hybrid system itself. Every Formula One power unit is required to operate within strict energy deployment limits. The amount of electric power used per lap. The rate at which the battery charges and discharges. The way the control electronics regulate the system. All of it is monitored. When an unusual shutdown or electrical interruption appears, the FIA sometimes requests deeper analysis to confirm exactly what happened. Not because a team necessarily did something wrong, but because hybrid technology is incredibly complex. And sometimes a failure can reveal something unexpected in the way the system operates. That is why officials have reportedly requested further data from Red Bull after the race. They want to understand the exact cause of the electrical interruption that triggered Verstappen's retirement. Was it a battery failure? A control electronics glitch? Or a safety shutdown triggered by abnormal energy behavior? At this moment, nobody outside the team knows for certain. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the situation so fascinating. Because the RB22 is not just another Red Bull car. It represents the beginning of a completely new era for the team. An era built around the Red Bull Ford Power Unit project. And if the first real reliability issue of that project is already attracting the attention of the FIA, then what happened in Shanghai may turn out to be far more important than a single retirement. It could be the first sign that Red Bull's most ambitious technical project is facing challenges much earlier than anyone expected. And this is where the story becomes even more complicated. Because the FIA investigation is not only about the moment the car failed. It is about everything that happened before the failure. Every lap. Every deployment of hybrid energy. Every fluctuation in the electrical system. When a Formula One car suffers a sudden electrical interruption, the FIA can request a full telemetry review. Not just the final laps. The entire race. That includes battery charge levels, energy recovery during braking, deployment from the MGUK, and the control software that manages how that energy is delivered to the rear wheels. Why does this matter? Because hybrid power units are governed by extremely strict limits. Teams are allowed to deploy only a specific amount of electrical energy per lap. Not more, not less. And the system must behave predictably within those limits. If a power unit suddenly shuts down, regulators want to understand why. Was the system protecting itself? Was there a voltage spike? Did a component overheat? Or did the control electronics detect something abnormal? At this stage, nobody is suggesting that Red Bull broke any rule. But the FIA still needs to understand the failure. And the reason is simple. Hybrid systems in Formula One are incredibly complex. They combine mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and advanced software. Thousands of parameters interact with each other every second. And when something fails, the root cause is rarely obvious. Sometimes a battery overheats. Sometimes a sensor gives incorrect data. Sometimes the control software shuts down the system to prevent permanent damage. That is exactly why the governing body collects detailed data after incidents like this. Because every failure helps them verify that the regulations are being respected. But inside the paddock, another conversation has already started. And it has nothing to do with regulations. It has to do with reliability. Because what happened to Verstappen in China was not just a minor glitch. The car lost significant power during the final laps while running in 6th position, forcing the team to retire the RB22 in the garage. That kind of failure early in the season immediately raises questions about the strength of the power unit. Especially when the project behind it is still relatively new. Remember, this engine architecture represents the beginning of Red Bull's long-term collaboration with Ford. A partnership designed to shape the next generation of Red Bull power units. Which means every failure right now carries extra attention. Engineers from both Red Bull and Ford will now analyze every detail of the incident. They will examine voltage behavior inside the battery pack, cooling performance inside the hybrid system, the stability of the power electronics, and the moment when the steering wheel display lost power, which hinted at a deeper electrical interruption in the system. Because if the root cause lies in the hybrid integration itself, the fix may not be simple. Hybrid systems interact with nearly every part of the car. Energy deployment affects traction. Energy recovery affects braking balance. Cooling requirements affect aerodynamics. Even the chassis design can influence how electrical components behave under stress. In other words, the power unit is not isolated. It is deeply integrated into the entire RB22. And that means solving a reliability issue might require changes far beyond the engine itself. Which is exactly why Red Bull engineers now face a difficult task before the next race. They must answer a question that every team in the paddock is now asking. Was the failure in Shanghai simply a random electrical issue? Or was it the first real warning sign that the RB22 Power Unit package still has weaknesses that only appear under full race conditions? But the FIA review is only one part of the pressure building around Red Bull tonight. Because while officials analyze the data, the rest of the paddock is asking a completely different question. How did Red Bull end up here in the first place? Just a few seasons ago, this team looked untouchable. They dominated races, controlled championships, and Verstappen made winning look routine. But the Chinese Grand Prix painted a very different picture. Throughout the entire weekend, the RB22 never looked comfortable. Verstappen struggled with the balance of the car. Under braking, the rear felt unstable. On corner exit, the traction was inconsistent. And on the long Shanghai straight, the hybrid deployment sometimes faded earlier than expected. That combination created a car that was extremely difficult to drive. Even Verstappen admitted during the weekend that every lap felt like survival. For a driver known for absolute confidence behind the wheel, that statement alone revealed how uncomfortable the RB22 had become. But the real problem might be deeper than just balance. Because several engineers in the paddock believe the RB22 suffers from something known as a narrow operating window. That means the car performs well only under very specific conditions. Temperature, ride height, energy deployment, tire grip. If any of those elements fall slightly outside the perfect range, the car's performance drops dramatically. And Shanghai may have exposed exactly that weakness. The circuit demands extremely precise hybrid management. Long straights, heavy braking zones, repeated acceleration phases. If the energy recovery system is not perfectly tuned, the car loses performance lap after lap. And that is exactly what analysts believe may have been happening with the RB22 even before the final failure. Sometimes the electric boost looked strong. Other times it seemed to fade earlier than expected, which suggests the system may have been struggling to manage energy consistently throughout the lap. But the moment that truly changed the narrative came near the end of the race. Because at one point, Verstappen was actually lapped by the race leader before the car retired. For many fans, that image felt almost unreal. The reigning champion, the driver who defined the previous era of Formula One, now being passed by the leading car on pure pace. Moments later, the Red Bull slowed again. Power faded, and the team retired the car in the garage. That sequence created a powerful symbol across the paddock. Not just a mechanical failure, but a reminder that Formula One can change very quickly. And the timing could not be worse for Red Bull, because the competition is no longer waiting. Mercedes looked incredibly strong in Shanghai. Ferrari remained close behind. And several teams appear to have understood the new generation of hybrid regulations faster than expected. Which means Red Bull now faces two simultaneous challenges. They must recover performance, and they must guarantee reliability. Solving one problem is difficult. Solving both at the same time is one of the hardest challenges in Formula One engineering. And this is why the FIA investigation, even if it is routine, adds another layer of tension. Because every engineer inside the Red Bull garage now knows that the entire paddock is watching closely. Watching the data. Watching the next race. Watching the RB22. Waiting to see whether China was simply an unlucky technical failure, or the first real crack in a project that was supposed to dominate the next era of Formula One.